We're back already with part 4 of this week's Shabbat, August 1st, 2020, Saturday, and also the 11th of Av. We're going to continue with the Torah reading for this week. We are at chapter 5 of Deuteronomy. The 10 words. As we know, these are also called the Ten Commandments. Moses called to all Israel and said to them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and the ordinances that I am speaking in your hearing today. Learn them and make sure to do them. Adonai our God cut a covenant with us in Horeb. Not with our fathers has Adonai cut this covenant, but with us, all of us alive here today. Adonai spoke with you face to face on the mountain from the midst of the fire. I was standing between Adonai and you at that time to tell you the word of Adonai, because you were afraid because of the fire and did not go up the mountain. He said, I am Adonai your God, who brought you out from the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. You shall not have other gods beside me. Do not make for yourself a graven image, no image of what is in the heavens above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. Do not bow down to them or worship them, for I, Adonai, your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and on the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my mitzvot. You must not take the name of Adonai your God in vain, for Adonai will not leave unpunished anyone who takes his name in vain. Observe Yom Shabbat, to keep it holy, as Adonai your God commanded you. 6 days you are to labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Shabbat to Adonai your God. In it you are not to do any work. Not you, or your son, or your daughter, or your slave, or your maid, or your ox, your donkey, or any of your livestock, or the outsider within your gates, so that your slave and your maid may rest as you do. You must remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Adonai your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. Therefore Adonai your God commanded you to keep Yom Shabbat. Honor your father and mother, just as Adonai your God commanded you, so that your days may be long and it may go well with you in the land Adonai your God is giving you. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness against your neighbor. And I want to say a word about that, because people don't quite understand that saying false things about someone, and I'm talking about the fake news, um, making false accusations about people, that is bearing false witness. That is the very thing that God is saying not to do. And it's gossip as well. Do not covet your neighbor's wife, nor desire your neighbor's house, his field, his manservant, his maidservant, his ox, his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. These words Adonai spoke to all your assembly on the mountain from the midst of the fire, the cloud, and the fog. With a great voice, he added no more. He wrote them on 2 tablets of stone and gave them to me. Live and prolong your days. As soon as you heard the voice from the midst of the darkness while the mountain was blazing with fire, you came near to me, all the heads of your tribes and your elders. Then you said, Adonai our God has just shown us his glory and his greatness, and we have heard his voice from the midst of the fire. This day we have seen that God speaks with man, and yet he keeps on living. Now then, why should we die? For this great fire will consume us. If we hear the voice of Adonai our God any more, then we will die. For who is there of all flesh who has heard the voice of the living God speaking from the midst of the fire, as we have and lived? You go near and hear all that Adonai our God says. Then you tell us all what Adonai our God tells you, and we will hear it and do it. Adonai heard the tone of your words when you spoke to me, and Adonai said to me, I've heard the tone of the words that this people have spoken to you. They have done well in that they have spoken. If only there was such a heart in them to fear me and keep all of my mitzvot always, so that it might go well with them and with their children forever. Go say to them, return to your tents. But as for you, stand here by me, and I will tell you the whole commandment, both the statutes and the ordinances that you are to teach them, and they will do them in the land I am giving them to possess. So you must take care to do as Adonai your God has commanded you. Do not turn aside to the right or to the left. You are to walk in all the ways that Adonai your God has commanded you, so that you may live and it may be well with you, and you may prolong your days in the land that you will possess. Just want to say something here, what happened here, and what Moses was addressing, and what God said to Moses. Actually, what God had wanted to do, and he really loved the people. He wanted to have them to restore that communion with them as best that he could do as he had with Adam and Eve every day. But the people didn't want, they were fearful of what they saw, the fire, the thundering, and instead they said, no, Moses, that's okay. We'll do whatever he says. You go, you commune with him, and you just bring it back to us. I mean, this is very fearful for us. We don't want to hear from him anymore, but we'll do whatever he says. We'll hear from him through you. And that's very sad because God wants to commune with us as well. He wants to have a relationship with us. So, and we can do that. Um, but what happened was, is they got the law at that point in time as the schoolmaster to direct them in the ways, instead of having communion where God would have led them day by day by day in what they should or should not do. Um, and we got that second chance through Yeshua, and we can commune with God on a day-to-day basis. Chapter 6. Now this is the commandment, the statutes and ordinances that Adonai your God commanded to teach you to do in the land you are crossing over to possess, so that you might fear Adonai your God to keep all his statutes and his mitzvot that I am commanding you, and your son, and your son's sons, all the days of your life, and so that you may prolong your days. Hear therefore, O Israel, and take care to do this, so that it may go well with you, and you may increase mightily, as Adonai the God of your fathers has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. And we've said this earlier, and we're at that part in Deuteronomy with the Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love Adonai your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These words, which I am commanding you today, are to be on your heart. You are to teach them diligently to your children, and speak of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. Bind them as a sign on your hand. They are to be as frontlets between your eyes, and write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Um, I just want to say a few things about this. This is the Shema, and it is known as the greatest commandment. And it is something. It's a morning prayer and it's an evening prayer that is done daily. I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler alert here. We're going to actually go into Matthew chapter 22, talking about the greatest mitzvah, chapter 22, verse 34, starting with verse 34. But the Pharisees, when they heard that Yeshua had silenced the Sadducees, gathered together in one place, and testing him, one of them, a lawyer, asked, Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the Torah? And he said to them, You shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like, You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The entire Torah and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So Yeshua also said it in his day, the Shema being the greatest commandment. Now, there is a story how 500 children were returned to the Jewish people after the Holocaust, um, and it had to do with the Shema. I'm going to read this. This is actually an article that I have just found, so I'm going to share this with you. Letters discovered by chance in the National Library Archives document Yitzhak Halevi Herzog's historic mission to redeem Jewish children taken in by Christian institutions and family. There's a story told of Rabbi Yitzhak Halevi Herzog. One day in 1946, Rabbi Herzog arrived at a large monastery which was known to have taken in Jewish children sent away by their parents to protect them from the Nazi terror which had ravaged Europe. Now, the time had come for the children to return home. The rabbi returned to the Reverend Mother, thanking her for saving the lives of the children and requesting to receive them back to the Jewish people now that the war was over. The nun was happy to agree, but asked the rabbi, "How can you know which of the hundreds of children here at the monastery are Jewish? After all, it has been many months since their parents had sent them there, and many had been mere infants at the time." Rabbi Herzog assured the Reverend Mother that he would know. He asked to gather all of the children in a large hall, ascended the stage, and cried in a loud voice, "Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." Immediately, dozens of children rushed to the stage shouting, "Mama" and "Papa," as tears filled their eyes. Many were sobbing uncontrollably. Though few of the children remembered much of their early lives, the sound of the Shema, the most famous prayer in the Jewish faith, instantly brought back memories of reciting these Hebrew words with their parents before bedtime. When Yitzhak Halevi Herzog embarked on his famous tour of European orphanages and monasteries with the goal of locating and retrieving thousands of lost Jewish children, he was serving as the chief Ashkenazi rabbi of Mandatory Palestine. He was recognized as as an authority on issues of halakha, Jewish religious law, and was held in great esteem by both religious and secular leaders around the world. Herzog absorbed a variety of different cultures during his early life. Born in, if I can say this right, Komza, Poland, in 1888, his family moved to Leeds, England in his youth, and then Paris, France, while Herzog attended the Sorbonne before continuing to the University of London. His groundbreaking doctoral thesis on the nature of the ancient blue dye known as the Tekhelet, Tekhelet, used during the Second Temple period was what first made him a public figure. In 1915, Herzog was appointed rabbi of the city of Belfast and would later go on to serve for 14 years as the chief rabbi of Ireland. He became a supporter of the struggle for Irish independence in the Irish Republican Army. Eamon de Valera, a leader of the revolt against the British and a future president of Ireland, was a personal friend who at times used the rabbi's house in Dublin as a hiding spot. Rabbi Herzog would also become a supporter of Irgun Zva Leumi, aka the Irgun or Etzel, the Jewish underground group which fought against the British authorities in the land of Israel, to which he finally arrived in 1936. The plight of Europe's Jews during the Holocaust tormented Yitzhak Halevi Herzog, and he devoted those years of his life to attempts to prevent the unfolding disaster. In April 1941, Rabbi Herzog, who was granted an audience with U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whom he hoped he could convince to act before it was too late. According to Herzog's biographer, Shaul Mashlish, the rabbi told FDR the following during their meeting: "I call upon his honor as someone in a position of power in the name of human conscience, in the name of human liberty, in the name of justice, to prevent the butchering of Jews and allow the survivors the possibility of reaching safe havens. Mr. President, I am not the person who will advise you on how to deal with this terrible problem. I come only with a plea and also a warning. The plea, save what can be saved. The warning, those who stood by will be held accountable in the future." The rabbinate in Stormy Days, Shaul Mazlish, 2017. Though the president promised Herzog he would hold a special meeting on the subject with his advisors. The rabbi came away disappointed. He felt that FDR was much more concerned with other matters. After the Allied victory in Europe in May 1945, Rabbi Herzog maintained his focus on the rescue of the continent's surviving Jews. By his own estimate, at the end of the war, some 10,000 Jewish children were held in secret by Catholic institutions and non-Jewish families who had bravely taken them in for their own safety. In 1946, Herzog embarked on a 6-month journey throughout Europe with the goal of returning the Jewish children to their own families. Before he began the search, he stopped at the Vatican, where he sought the help of Pope Pius XII. The rabbi came with a message of thanks for the crucial intervention of Catholic institutions in saving young Jewish lives, but also insisted that the children now be released. Each child is like 1,000 children following this great tragedy, he told the pontiff. While Pius XII did not issue the sweeping public declaration the rabbi was hoping for, the Vatican was indeed helpful in obtaining the release of many of the children. During his European trip, Herzog visited France, Switzerland, Belgium, Holland, England, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Ireland. Much of the work he and his team faced was bureaucratic. They drew up updated lists of children with the help of the respective governments and local community institutions, and went about seeking Jewish organizations with the authority to assume legal guardianship. Once the initial information was collected, it was often a matter of searching through individual villages and monasteries while using the lists as guides. Volunteers from sympathetic organizations, both Jewish and non-Jewish, were instrumental in this effort. There were many cases in which Christian families had formed strong bonds with the adopted children, and they understandably did not want to give them up. Rescuing the children is difficult when the one you are contending against comes as a brother, the rabbi said in one of his speeches. Much of Yitzhak Halevi Herzog's correspondence from this period is preserved today in the archives of the National Library of Israel. The library's archivists were surprised to discover these letters and telegrams among the personal archives of the well-known Jerusalem attorney Alexander Amdor, an associate of Rabbi Herzog's. Amdor's archives were donated to the National Library in 2015. And on this, you can actually see there is a blog.nli.org.il /en/rabbi_Herzog/ if you wanted to see actually there's letters and everything. Herzog's efforts were not limited to children. In the telegram, Rabbi Herzog sought to obtain a French visa for a Holocaust survivor by the name of Sonia Friedberg. And in the Hebrew letter below, one of her relatives in Israel thanks the rabbi, son Yaakov, for their efforts on her behalf, noting her difficult personal circumstances. The letter reads, "I thank you very much for your goodwill in helping me obtain an entry visa to France for my relative from Poland. Her name and address, Sonia Friedberg." And it says she's about 35. Sonia Friedberg loads Pietro Trokowska, 80, her age about 35. "I am certain that you will do everything in your ability to ease my relative's situation. She was snatched from the fire, and she is lonely and desolate in a foreign sea of hatred in the land where her parents, husband, and other relatives perished." One of Herzog's most effective partners in the effort to retrieve Jewish children was the Polish Jewish activist Yershahu Drucker, who would approach families and institutions who had taken in Jewish children, often offering money and gifts in exchange for their release. Rabbi Herzog's political connections were critical in raising these funds, and there's actual documents that are on this site, and it's also in the National Library of Israel as well. So, and there was also a letter that's in there below that was addressed to Yaakov Herzog from the Zionist Coordination Committee for the Redemption of Jewish Children. It concerned one of the children redeemed by Yershayahu Drucker. And the letter read, "As per your request, the girl Naomi Barter, born in Lodz in 1937, was redeemed from the foreigners by Rabbi Drucker and is now at the Sacred Communities Orphanage as the expenses of this matter reached a sum of 320,000 zlotys, and you in your letter write that your American friends committed to participating in the expense of 100. We request that you inform us the method by which we can receive the above sum." The Hebrew words were written, also addressed to Rabbi Herzog. There's a actual, you can see that on the site as well, on behalf of a group of Jewish children who survived the Holocaust. And it actually, the exact date and origin is unclear, but they were likely read in his presence. "We are the children of the surviving remnants, Sharit Ha-Pleta, are very happy to receive our distinguished chief rabbi, Rabbi Herzog, and we promise to him that we shall make Aliyah and help build the land. God willing, we shall live to see the liberated Jewish state in the spirit of our Torah." In October of 1946, over 500 of the redeemed Jewish children boarded a train in Katowice, Poland, which then made the long journey all the way to the Holy Land. These children would soon become citizens of the State of Israel, founded 19 months later. Upon the Declaration of Independence in 1948, Yitzhak Halavei Herzog became Israel's first Ashkenazi chief rabbi. His son Chaim Herzog would later become president of the Jewish state. His grandson Isaac Herzog is today the chairman of the Jewish Agency and former head of the opposition. You can find more of Rabbi Herzog's correspondence from his famous rescue mission as well in the National Library of Israel. And that is my little take on the Shema. And there's a lot of stories about the Shema, but this one I wanted to share with you how important the Shema was, and how important it was to be able to identify who were Jewish children and who weren't. And this is a perfect example of that story. Um, so that is the Shema, and it is it is the greatest commandment, and it is shared in Jewish households every day, morning, evening, and the children learn to pray that at a very early age. And as you could see, how that was so important, and those children could be identified, because when Rabbi Herzog said the Shema, those children knew that, and it was deep within them, as they recognized that, and he could actually save them and bring them back to families. Um, so that is the Shema. I'm going to come back with the next part, and because I'm already at 23 minutes.